For my lesson plan, I'll be having my kids write an equation in the form y equals mx plus b, model a linear relationship between two quantities using verbal, numeric, tabular, and graphical representation. So basically, what I'm wanting my kids to do is be able to solve any graphing equation. So they need to be able to see a graph if it's in a table form, a line form, or if it's actually represented as a graph. Be able to write down the equation for it and transform this into a word problem also if necessary. For the content objective, I want students to be able to translate word problems into linear function, tables, slopes, and intercept form. So it's important that they can actually read the word problem, especially if you have an intermediate level ESL student. Then I want them to know all the, like, what the word problem means and how they would be able to translate that into math. For the language objectives, it's for students to read word problems and linear functions silently with ease. So it's what they'd be working on is being able to read those word problems on their own, and I have specific strategies to help them be able to read and understand the word problems all on their own. So the first thing I want my kids to do in class for warm up would be to practice some vocabulary. These are going to be key words that they need to practice so they'll be able to understand what the questions are asking them, and so not all the word problems are confusing because there might be some words that they haven't seen before. So it's important that they understand what these words are. So for the key vocabulary, the first one is proportional. And what I'm going to have these students do is I'm going to have a list of these words written on the whiteboard, and when these kids first come in, they're going to have to look up these words on their phones or on their Chromebooks, and they're going to have to find the definitions of these words. And once they find the definitions, I want them to come up with a real world example and also use it in a sentence. So this will really get them thinking about how to use that word. So the list of words I have are proportional, non-proportional, unit rate, point slope form, slope intercept form, and the equation for the slope. So with all those words, they'd have to define, give an example, and then use it in a sentence. So that should get them in a good thinking point for the rest of the class where they won't be too confused on some of the vocabulary terms. And then after we go over the keywords, we're gonna start on our first assignment, which is the students will be divided into groups, and because they're going to be working on tables, graphs, and the actual equation of a line. So what we're going to do is we're going to divide the classroom into 3 sections where it's one station is working on the graphs, like just purely graphs, and turning those into tables and equations. One station is going to be working on lines and turning those lines into graphs and equations. And the other station is going to be working on the tables and turning the tables into graphs and equations. And this is important because it'll get them good practice on switching between all the different forms of graphing equations. And then there'll be a final station, which will be the teacher led station. So if they have any questions or they're having concerns or difficulties, they can come to my station and I'll be able to help them with any issues they're having. And I can also ask them the critical questions at this point. So I can ask them if it was like if I had a beginner ESL student, I could just ask them in a very simple context, like what does $7 per hour mean? To really get home to that, that's just the slope, and it's just you take out all the details of a question and you just get it to the bare minimum, and just really make them understand that you don't need all the detail work. You just can do the bare minimum. If maybe if I had an intermediate student, I could add some words, and so I'm saying you were paid $7 per hour instead of just $7 per hour. So the paid is extra, but they would now be able to start understanding that. With an advanced, I could phrase it in almost fully questions. So if you were paid $7 per hour, what is the linear equation for this problem? So again, now they're really understanding it, so they can think about this in a more vocabulary friendly way. And then for the advanced high, I could give a whole question statement. So Jenny just got hired at McDonald's. If Jenny makes $7 per hour, write a linear equation for Jenny's salary. So a lot more wordy and lengthy, but they would be able to understand that fully. So after after the workstation, where I'm gonna have them meet working in stations together, they're gonna start working on their exit ticket, which is they're gonna have 10 word problems, which they're gonna have to be able to read these because they're gonna be working independently. They're gonna have to be working independently on these word problems, and but the thing about these word problems is that I want them to use the key vocabularies that I gave them and almost use it as a word bank. And so they are going to, anytime they see key vocabulary words, they're going to highlight these vocabulary words or underline whichever is their preference. And they're gonna show that in each one of these problems, they're gonna highlight and underline every one of the key vocabulary words, and then they're gonna write what that vocabulary means and why that's a key vocabulary word, and so this should help them really solve the word problems, just because if they can find the key vocabulary words like per, because per stands for slope, or if it's like you're paid once, that would mean you're paid for, that would be your B, your Y intercept, because it's only happening once. It's your starting amount. So it's important that they understand what these word problems are and how they would go about solving them. And then again, if they are still having trouble reading the actual problem, I will be there at my desk, ready to answer any questions, clarify any confusion in wording. So it's if that's a problem, they don't have to worry about that. And to differentiate this problem, I'll have another form of this. So if I had a beginner ESL level student, I might not give them, since 10 word problems is a lot, I might not give them as many. I might just give them 3 or 4 word problems, maybe one with the simpler wordings, not as much excess information, to just help them along the way. Um, if I had an intermediate, I could do the same thing, give 3 or 4, but maybe give a little harder on the word problems, maybe give them a little more on the difficulty side and see if they can handle it. And then advanced and advanced high, I would just give them the regular word problems, and then I would, because at that point they should be fully able to understand what those word problems mean, and if they still don't, they can ask for help. And then for an exit, for their exit ticket, so after they've finished their word problems, because we're of course going to go over these word problems, we're going to do kind of a Socratic seminar style where the kids are going to go in a circle, and now we're going to talk about these word problems. We're going to explain exactly what they mean, all the answers. And so what I want them to do is I want them to have their problems with their vocabulary. So on the first problem, I want everyone to just kind of say what they found were the key vocabulary words, what helped them solve the problem, and then I want them to go over the working of how they solved the problem, what they did. So if there's students that didn't quite understand, they're kind of falling behind, they're just kind of twiddling their thumbs, they might actually be able to understand fully what they didn't understand, because it's a different way of teaching. So instead of me teaching it, I'm having the students help each other by teaching each other what's the problems, because a way I teach the problem might not exactly click for a student, but if a student can explain it in a way that clicks for that student, then it might be easier for them to understand the problem and what comes. So that's why I feel like a Socratic seminar is a very good way to review over the work that you've done, because it's 10 problems is quite a bit of problems, so it's will make a good review afterwards too. So it's a lot of problems that they get to talk about, so that means multiple people in the class will get to talk. It won't just be one person solving all the problems. It'll be the whole class kind of helping each other out, making sure um, they've done the work. And also, if the students know they have to talk and discuss about their work afterwards, they'll be more motivated to work on the problems, because they don't want to be caught out not knowing any of the answers, or not having anything to say. Because if they're just called upon, that could be a little bit embarrassing for them. So it's important for them to understand what they've been doing, and it's important to have their vocabulary word bank and everything ready for this Socratic seminar. And then, so with that, everything will be nice and reviewed. It'll be good and fresh for their next day. And so that'll be what my students are able to do when they leave. And then if I need to differentiate any of the problems, um, I will just give them less of the work and the simpler problems, so it's not overwhelming for those students that are actually just having trouble reading language. They might know how to do the math, but they just can't actually read the problem. So I'll just give them a little less work, and an easier vocabulary on the problem, so it's not as technical in reading. It's just more math. Um, because in the end, with math, it's a little easier to understand, since you can just give numbers and variables, and you won't really need the extra wording. You can solve a problem just by saying the numbers and variables. So that should be my full lesson plan, and this is for 8th grade level math, and and yeah. So I hope you guys enjoy my lesson plan, and I hope Hope you guys learned something.